Long story short was my favorite series of 2025, full stop. And that's saying a lot because it was an outstanding year for television and particularly for animated television. But given that I'm a huge fan and advocate for the creator's other show, BoJack Horseman, you might not be surprised to know that I thought this was an absolute masterpiece. What you probably will be surprised by is how long it took me to make this video. And well, long story short, it was a really busy year. Short story long, this show is so well written and weaves such a brilliant, intricate web of a story that I just did not feel I was going to be able to do the show justice without committing some real time to the script. And well, if you've seen the runtime of this video, you know I committed. I know lots of the people watching this have probably seen the show already, but for anyone who hasn't, the first part of the video is going to be a more general, spoiler-light breakdown of why I think it's so damn special. Then we'll dive fully into spoilers with a full episode-by-episode breakdown. If you haven't seen Long Story Short, and any of what I say in the first section of this video interests you, please pause the video whenever you're interested, watch the 10-episode first season, and then come on back. I'll still be here, and it will be worth it. Okay, so if you're a fan of adult animated shows like this that have nuanced characters and outstanding, clever writing, my friend Toonrific Tariq actually just launched a Kickstarter for his indie pilot, Hey. And yeah, he's my homie, I'm plugging his project, but the truth is that this pilot is genuinely special. You know I love adult animation, I wouldn't just say that. Tariq describes it as Insecure meets Bob's Burgers, and he's really honing in on that charming, infectious, joyous love you feel between the characters in shows like Bob's, and pushing that to the forefront of his show, focusing on a young couple navigating their relationship in their 20s. Tariq's been working on this for about 5 years. I've seen an early version of the animatic. I've been watching him cook behind the scenes. I cannot wait for this thing to see the light of day. It is a really unique blend of classic and modern sitcom that I personally find incredibly appealing. I know this is a plug, but I am being so serious when I say I'm just so proud of my friend, and if anything deserves support, it's this. As I write this, he's basically secured his goal already, but the stretch goals are going to be worth it. Not only can they lock in 1 or 2 more episodes of the show, but bro said he'll finally do Static Shock and Daria videos if they hit certain milestones. Please make Tariq talk about Daria. I think that'll be really worth it. Please check out Hayes' Kickstarter, consider supporting, and now let's get back to Long Story Short. Put simply, Long Story Short is one of my favorite first seasons of television of all time. For one, it personally speaks to my sensibilities. I'm a huge fan of shows that explore the nuances of family dynamics, and this one does that like no other. But its innovation in delivering that story creates for such a unique viewing experience. This kind of experimentation and attempts to try new things with the medium feel so necessary in an age where adult animation mostly stays within a pretty small box. If you haven't heard anything about how Long Story Short is formatted, the show basically jumps around back and forth across a pretty large timeline, with its only real rhyme and reason being how to unfold the story. The series focuses primarily on the Schwooper family, Elliot Cooper, Naomi Schwartz, and their kids Avi, Shira, and Yoshi Schwooper. That cast also expands into their significant others and kids depending on the episode, because the innovative hook of this series is that each episode takes place in an entirely different time period. This basically gives us little snapshots of many different moments in these characters' lives across a sprawling timeline. One episode, they're teenagers or young adults. The next, they're in their 30s and have kids of their own. Plus, each episode often tacks on a cold open set in an additional time period very briefly, taking seemingly small and disparate events in these characters' lives and tying them together via story or theme. So over the course of this 10-episode season, we see all of these different vantage points and get a much better look at the tapestry that is the Schwooper family story. Now, I have been pretty critical of the binge format becoming the new norm in TV releases, but I think Long Story Short is an example of the writers not just producing a show that works well in binge format, but actually thrives in it. By watching a season of this show, you're basically mainlining so many different events in this family's lives and inferring a ton about what happens in between. And the binge format really lends to that experience. Creator Raphael Bob-Waksberg talked a bit about this in an IndieWire interview earlier this year. Basically, knowing that a long-running series isn't entirely likely in today's streaming era, Bob-Waksberg pondered how to forge a strong connection between audience and characters. That's hard harder to do with fewer seasons with shorter episode orders, which you see a lot of in streaming. On a show like this, the goal is to make you fall in love with the characters. Can you shortcut that a little bit by jumping around time and watching these characters grow up? Can you feel by the end of the first season that you've watched 5 seasons of this show? Can you feel that same kind of warmth that you feel with something you've seen 100 episodes of? That's the great experiment. Given the landscape of television right now, I'm probably not going to get 100 episodes. Is there a way to get some of that same effect? I will say that for me, I started feeling this by the end of the first episode, which was truly shocking. But I also felt it over and over again over the course of the series, because what this show does is root everything in the emotions of the characters so incredibly well. Even when we've missed major events and inciting incidents that have gotten the characters to these emotional places, we understand what those events mean to these characters. And it also makes the fitting together of all of these different puzzle pieces, revealing more and more about their timeline, all the more satisfying. I actually got to interview the show's creator, Bob-Waksberg, back in August, and I asked him if they had pre-written the entire timeline's events ahead of time. Here's what he had to say.
We're kind of going as we go, but we are having to keep track of stuff in some fun ways, and we're painting ourselves into corners. What's nice about doing animation is you can always go back and change stuff or add stuff.
If you want to see the rest of that interview, it's over on my other channel, Johnny Too Casual. But I think that this approach proved to be the right one, because by not entirely boxing themselves into a pre-written timeline, they allow themselves more freedom to bring the emotions to the forefront and craft around the characters first and foremost, rather than fitting those characters into a prefabbed box. And what he mentioned about being able to go and add in these little details later goes a really long way, because often the recontextualization from later episodes makes rewatches of those earlier moments wildly rewarding. In fact, this is one of the most rewarding and rewatchable shows I've ever seen. Obviously, that has a lot to do with the show's entire trick/experiment, that by unfolding the narrative non-linearly, new context will change how you watch earlier or later events. But on top of that, the dialogue is incredibly quick, and this family often talks over each other a bit. Not in a way that's confusing. I found that the story is always followable, but I often discover new hilarious nuggets of dialogue I missed because I was focused on a different character. Another thing I love about this show is the way its characters are rooted in their Jewish culture. At the Annecy Festival, Bob-Waksberg said that he wanted it to feel like a Jewish King of the Hill, and though the shows are obviously formatted and delivered very differently, I think this idea really shines through. It never feels like the show is trying to give you some kind of history or cultural lesson. It simply uses the cultural aspects of Jewish family life as a backdrop over the course of the season. Characters casually use Yiddish words or phrases. The first episode is set at Yoshi's bar mitzvah, and over these 10 episodes, it actually does a great job showcasing the varieties of ways people can be affected growing up in this type of Jewish household, giving us drastically different journeys and experiences for all 3 Schwooper siblings. Speaking of the Schwooper siblings, obviously this show simply wouldn't work if the characters were duds, and I'm happy to say that I love this entire family so much. The show does a great job not only differentiating each character, but clearly defining their relationships to each other and to their parents. In just 10 episodes, it does an incredible job exploring the intricacies and nuances of their family dynamics, and each rewatch I found myself more attached to a different character. My first watch through I was very honed in on Avi and Shira, but my second rewatch I really connected to Yoshi. I think the one character people are going to find the most challenging is Naomi, but that is very much by design, because the other characters also find her challenging. And I'm not exaggerating when I say she's the one who really drives the entire season forward. They pull a sort of subversion late in the season that I found so impressive and narratively satisfying. All I'll say is make sure you read the episode titles as you watch. Also, Lisa Edelstein deserves an Emmy for this performance. It is actually incredible. Honestly, this season of TV was so good that I would have actually been satisfied if this was the only season they made. I'm incredibly grateful that there's a second season in the works, because there's still so much more potential for storytelling with this family and with this format, but this is an outstanding season of television. And I think this is probably the best time for us to actually move into our spoiler territory. So if any of this remotely interested you, I really want to urge you to go check out this show. There seems to be very little buzz around what is easily one of the best seasons of TV this year, and I'm really hoping that the audience can grow enough going into season 2 that they'll greenlight more going forward. And I think it can, because I keep getting texts from friends like this saying, oh my god, this show is so good, why isn't anyone talking about it? Okay, this is your final spoiler warning. We're about to start diving into the first episode's full details.
Ridiculous.
Careful!
The first episode is titled Yoshi's Bar Mitzvah, but our cold open actually takes place in 1996, just after Naomi's mother's funeral, as the Schwooper family is traveling via funeral procession, or having lost the funeral procession. And honestly, a family car ride during a trying time was an incredibly smart way to establish these characters, put them in close quarters in an emotional state, and you're going to see some of their strongest character traits shine through. We immediately get a taste of Naomi, who is a little dramatic, to say the least, particularly when it comes to matters in regards to her family.
We're lost. I'm an orphan, and we're lost.
We see how Elliot does his best to be the peacekeeper in the family. Every issue that arises, he in some way tries to mitigate or resolve. Every concern he tries to soften, whether that's Naomi's grief, Yoshi and Shira's backseat conflict, or Avi's existential revelation. We see that basically every line of dialogue from Avi in the sequence is an attempt to make his mother feel better or ease her pain, and almost everyone is rebuked pretty quickly. First saying it was a nice service, Naomi disagrees, then saying it's nice that Bubby is with Grandpa now, to which Naomi tells him Jews don't believe in heaven. But even though you can tell these deflections from his attempts to ease his mother's pain hurt him, and the things she says even concern him existentially, it doesn't really deter him. Even through the fact that in this moment, he's realizing that Jews don't believe in an afterlife, he still manages to make his mother smile with a joke.
You think Jews could have negotiated a better deal?
Meanwhile, you can see that Yoshi is harassing Shira from his car seat while Shira is loudly protesting. This is probably the smallest piece of character establishment in the cold open, but it shows that Yoshi is sort of the wild card who shakes things up, the disruptor, while Shira feels very strongly when she's being treated poorly or unjustly, or when she feels people have wronged her, and as we will learn, she does not forget. Her anger here fittingly hits a great button joke into the title sequence.
This is why Jews don't go to heaven.
It's a quick, concise, and really well-written cold open that gives us great insight into these characters and their family dynamics. But the bulk of this episode takes place in 2004, the day of Yoshi's bar mitzvah. Obviously, the show focuses on an entire family, and therefore some episodes are more centered on specific characters than others. And while in many ways this is an Avi episode, on rewatch I found that it's also very much a Jen episode, Avi's girlfriend and future wife. And honestly, this is another really smart decision. What better way to give the audience a window into the Schwooper family than through an outsider who is also meeting most of them for the first time. And basically every single conflict that arises in this episode stems from Jen being a semi-unexpected part of the event. But before this, we get not just a really great introduction to Jen herself, but to her and Avi's relationship dynamic, wrapped within this sort of amazing meta conversation that spells out the entire gimmick of the series. Avi is showing Jen the song Obvious Child by Paul Simon, and he's basically explaining how the song itself manipulates time in its storytelling, starting with Sonny being born and jumping right past most of his life.
It's because that's time, right? That's like one moment, you're young, you're free, next thing you know, Sonny gets married and moves away.
And obviously this is what the show is doing as well. This very scene takes place 8 years after the prior one. The next episode will take place 10 years after this. It's a fun way to telegraph this show's magic trick within a conversation, and one that gives us great insight into Avi's interests and career, while highlighting how different he is than his significant other. I really love how realistic this scene and relationship are, particularly for a college-aged relationship. This scene shows that Avi and Jen have great chemistry, great affection for each other, they're very cute together, and also shows that they do have some fundamental differences in how they engage with the things they love.
I was just gonna play you a song from Les Mis and not talk the whole time.
And obviously this doesn't hold any major weight in isolation, but it's giving us some great insight into their dynamic and the things that a couple might find endearing or charming about each other in the early stages that we maybe later learn can become grating. But the most important thing about Jen and Avi in this episode comes down to how Jen is received by the family and how Avi reacts to those things. For her first introduction to the Schwoopers, he put her in an overwhelming situation. A literal trial by fire, as we see by the end. Sort of saying, if you can handle this, you can handle any of it. And basically, immediately Jen is bombarded. Naomi is all over her, ignores her name, starts calling her Jennifer. Shira questions her while acting victimized about the flight timing. Yoshi is awkward, and she's more or less shamed by Naomi for her kind gesture, bringing a vase as a gift.
I have to find something to put in it, which is more work for me on the busiest day of my life, but it's lovely.
This episode really sets up Naomi as that aforementioned challenge, and Jen gets the brunt of it here, which sets up the conflict with Avi, since as we learned in the cold open, he is very people-pleasy when it comes to his mother. And so when Jen has justifiable concerns about how his family feels about her, Avi doesn't do a great job easing those fears or alleviating the frustration frustrations. Even the simple task of getting his mother to call her the correct name feels like too much for him.
Your mom keeps calling me Jennifer?
Which is fine, and you're fine with it?
Obviously, it's not as though the blame can or should be entirely placed on Avi here, but it's clearly a struggle that is creating more conflict within his relationship, and it doesn't really resolve here either. He confronts Naomi about it, but effectively backs off when she pushes back.
It's my fault. Forget I said anything.
I do think that Naomi's response here is also interesting though. I can't tell if Naomi believes she's genuinely trying to make good or if it's a slightly vindictive response, but she basically announces Jen's nice vase gesture to everyone at the party, but it makes Jen singled out and it's very awkward. And her attempts to make good basically dominoes into the climax in a wild way. During Yoshi's candle lighting ceremony, Naomi ends up inserting Jen as the last candle. A gesture, but it leads to Uncle Barry throwing a complete fit over the fact that they didn't include his late wife Sylvia, while including Avi's new girlfriend who's never been to a family event ever. I really adore this climax. I know I focused on Avi, Jen, and Naomi for this first episode breakdown, and there's a reason for that you'll understand later, but this climax escalates every single subplot into one fiery event as Uncle Barry charges at Jen. But what I love about this ending is that the one who puts herself in harm's way to stop Barry is Naomi. It really sets up her character, somebody who is exceedingly difficult on a personal level and might seem to be completely unwilling to self-examine if confronted, but will go to extreme lengths for the well-being of her loved ones. And the importance of her loved ones is echoed in what she says to Barry to help ease his sorrow about Sylvia.
If we lit a candle for everybody I miss, we would be here for days.
A very nice bookend for Naomi, given the cold open was her in grief after losing her mother. But the most affecting bookend is actually for Jen and Avi, as they fly back from the trip and debrief from the insanity. And it's once again a really heartwarming scene that showcases their chemistry. It makes you really like them as a couple and feel excited for their future as they've gotten past this first big milestone. But as they listen to music together, it cuts to 2022, and they aren't listening to Les Mis on the plane. Avi is listening to Paul Simon's Obvious Child alone in his car. And you realize that though they made it through the bar mitzvah, in the end, they didn't make it. Avi takes this deep breath as he listens to the song that we had just seen him so ecstatic to break down for Jen, the song that made him excited about his own future, and now he listens to it seemingly as this reminder of what has already been. And it cuts to the credits as Sonny gets married and moves away. Man, I genuinely can't get over how incredible this first episode is, and I honestly only really scratched the surface. It establishes its characters and invests you in one of their journeys just thoroughly enough to pull off this magic trick as the episode closes out, hitting you with that one extra scene that recontextualizes everything you just saw. This is the only episode in the season that jumps in time at the end of the episode as well, but it's clear why. It's laying out exactly what the show intends to do, showcasing its gimmick on a micro level before the show opens up and showcases it on a macro level, because every single episode of this show hits different after you've watched the entire season.
That's why I want kids.
The second episode is titled Hannah's Dance Recital, though interestingly, this was originally intended to be the fourth episode. This will be even more interesting the more we talk about it, I promise, but this episode jumps forward to 2014 and focuses on Shira and Avi's relationship, primarily from Shira's POV. It also immediately introduces us to Kendra, Shira's wife, another really impressive example of how this show manages to jump across the timeline without really skipping a beat. Shira and Kendra's relationship is immediately clear to the audience through context, despite the fact that we've just jumped 10 years in the future and haven't seen any of Shira's life in between. And it's even more impressive when you realize that this was meant to be the fourth episode and was written as though we had already met Kendra in the episode that swapped places with this one. But before the bulk of the episode, the cold open is set in 1991, and there are a ton of little seeds planted here that set up what would come later, some subtly and some less so. The majority of this cold open is about Avi and Shira as they play on the beach in New Jersey, culminating in Avi abandoning Shira while they're playing lifeguard to run off to play with his cousins. This is the thing that textually plays a big role in the episode later, but there are other small details here that tie in really fascinating smaller ways. For one, we get a little insight into Naomi's relationship to her family, particularly in how she's treated by her sister here, as her sister praises Yoshi for being such a quiet baby.
I
wish my babies had been slow like that.
Moments like these, I think we can presume, say a lot about Naomi's childhood growing up with her family and about how she learned to relate to and interact with her immediate family. I'd be willing to bet they definitely informed how Naomi treats her children. Naomi's sister effectively flings an insult at her disguised as a compliment. A positive can never just be seen as a positive. There has to be some kind of underlying criticism lurking beneath. Sounds a little bit like Naomi. We also get a lot of insight into Naomi's adult relationship with her sister, telling us that Naomi lugged her entire family, including her toddler, across the country to visit them in New Jersey, while Naomi's sister has never visited them in California even once, and her sister even subtly shames her for moving away in the first place.
But you're the one who moved to California, Naomi.
Where we also have beaches, if you'd like to see sometime.
In addition to that little bit of character lore and insight, little aspects of their relationship will tie into what we see from Avi and Shira later in the episode. Speaking of, the entire premise of this episode back in 2014 is that Shira and Kendra are ready to have kids, and they want to ask Avi to be the sperm donor for Kendra so that their kid can have both Kendra's and Schwooper DNA. And even in this first scene, we see how Shira holds a little resentment towards Avi that parallels the cold open.
Maybe if we have a baby, Avi and Jen will visit us.
They visited that one time.
They should want to come to us.
This also speaks to how Shira sort of feels left behind by Avi, which ties to that beach cold open as well, and this will tie into the issue at hand pretty definitively later in the episode. The conflict here is Shira's difficulty asking Avi for this pretty big favor trudges up a lot of their lifelong traumas, both from their family and with each other. Granted, Shira doesn't do a very good job asking.
We want your sperm, dude.
But you can see how instantly Avi is overwhelmed by this. He leaves the auditorium even before the play begins. I think this conflict boils down to a couple major aspects of these two characters. Avi, in a lot of ways, has felt suffocated by expectations his entire life. He specifically cites the weight of expectation from the cultural aspects of Judaism, which is super understandable. And on top of this, obviously having met Naomi, we can see clearly how he would be suffocated by her expectations. He even reveals that Naomi wanted him to ask the school to move the dance recital so it wouldn't interfere with her vacation. And from what we see in episode 1, Avi often concedes to those suffocating expectations when it comes to Naomi. My read here is that Avi saw this request from Shira as a sort of expectation. And while he historically struggled to fight back against the weight of expectations in other aspects of his life, he doesn't feel a struggle to fight back against his younger sister, which means he is misplacing his pent-up frustrations. Meanwhile, Shira vocalizes pretty early that she does not like asking for help. So while Avi is feeling like Shira is expecting this big favor from him, the reality is that she was struggling immensely with even asking him. There are a few different aspects we see from Shira's life over the series that reinforce why she was conditioned to avoid needing anybody, but in this episode it ties directly to that cold open, and in a moment of vulnerability, Shira reveals to Avi the rest of that story, that after he left her to play with their cousins, she actually almost drowned and was saved by this random guy, and then Naomi basically chastised her for being in the water alone. Shira trusted her brother to be there, needed his help, nearly died, and then got in trouble for it. A pretty rough series of events for such a young kid, something that understandably imprinted some things into her psyche. And though this hits Avi hard, he also gets defensive about it instead of just acknowledging how scary that must have been for Shira. I really appreciated how much we can derive about these characters just from the way this conflict unfolds. It really lends to the non-chronological nature of the show and makes for a really interesting way to learn about their lives and history. And despite so much conflict erupting from their lifelong traumas, there are these really wonderful moments where the two meet eye to eye as well. My favorite is probably when Hannah finally goes on stage at the recital, just after Avi is sort of trying to sell Shira on not having kids. As the performance plays out, they choose to just sit on Avi's face, and the showcase of his wide variety of emotions here says so much. You can tell that in various moments of the performance he is proud, concerned, excited, nervous, surprised, all in the span of like 20 seconds. It is great storytelling, followed by the reveal that Shira was just watching Avi's face during the performance.
That's why I want kids.
It's a really lovely moment. And while the conflict isn't entirely solved in the episode, it comes to a pretty heartwarming resolution as they both apologize to each other. Shira expresses that she has a hard time needing things, and Avi expresses that he needs Shira's request to reach beyond just the fact that they share DNA, which I read as him feeling like, for him, it can't just be an expectation because they are related. It has to be because he has traits that Shira would be excited to see in her own children. And the decision that they ultimately do not decide to go through with the donation is surprising and compelling, but I like that they've come to understand each other a bit better through this conflict. One of my favorite moments comes towards the end, after Shira expresses that Avi doesn't check in with her enough, and then as they drive away, Avi sends her a sweet little checking in text. It's small, but this smile goes a really long way to showcase that though they didn't resolve the issue at hand, they made progress. I think one of the other most fascinating aspects of this episode is seeing exactly how Avi has changed in the interim 10 years. It doesn't feel like he's changed as a person. He exhibits a lot of the same behaviors and tendencies and is clearly passionate about the same things, but his outlook on life has changed significantly. In the opening scene, we get our first little hint of this from the way Kendra impersonates Avi.
I'll be Avi. I like music, but also I hate it, and here's why in 1,000 words.
No.
This is our first hint about Avi's career, later confirmed to be a music journalist, and though you might expect that Kendra could be being hyperbolic here, Avi's own words later in the episode reaffirm this impression.
Any new music we should be listening to?
Shira, what do you...
It's all bad.
Now you've got him started.
Obviously, this is in stark contrast to how we see Avi talking about the song Obvious Child back in the first episode, but even just from the limited amount we learn about Avi in that premiere, this development is not surprising, even if it is disappointing. This episode really showcases that Avi has this tendency to become disillusioned or grow cynical, and this was basically forecasted in that cold open of the first episode, as he went through his mini existential crisis, realizing that Jews don't believe in heaven. And we see it throughout this episode in his arguments with Shira. He harbors a lot of disillusioned resentment towards his religion, his family, maybe even a slight disillusionment towards being a father based on how he questions why Shira would even want to go down that road, which makes the moment where Avi watches Hannah with adoration, concern, and love hit all the harder. Even with that cynical worldview creeping in, Avi can still find the beauty in the life he has. And that is also a really interesting thing to consider when you realize that Jen's subplot in this episode firmly establishes that she gave up on her dreams so that Avi could pursue his. To see Avi grow disillusioned when their life path was forged in large part for his benefit has got to be majorly disappointing for Jen, even if she also admits that she may have gone down that road in a sort of self-sabotaging way.
Well, if we moved out here for him, then it's not like I gave up. You know?
Avi and Jen's final beat in the episode is also really interesting. It seems like the conflict with Shira helped Avi realize that he really is lucky in a lot of ways, and he actually expresses his gratitude to Jen for making the move with him, even suggesting that they should maybe have another kid. And while this is a lovely moment of realization and what feels like growth for Avi, Jen's surprised reaction is probably the most telling thing here. Man, I don't know if I can even say enough about just how fully realized these characters feel so instantaneously. Through 2 episodes, it feels like we have such a firm grasp of nearly every family member, with the one exception probably being Yoshi, which is why the end of this episode feels like such a perfect lead-in. Shira asks Yoshi to be their donor in place of Avi, and he immediately says yes, but he also thinks that Shira asked him first, and this final line of the episode really leads effectively into episode 3.
You and Avi, you guys are so close in age, sometimes I just feel like the extra one. You coming to me first, it really does mean a lot.
Now, even in the first episode, which was called Yoshi's Bar Mitzvah, we got very little Yoshi, only little hints of what was to come for his character. And then, with Hannah's dance recital, he was absent entirely from the story as we focused on a conflict between his older siblings, Avi and Shira. So Yoshi vocalizing here that he feels like the extra one not only gives us insight into his character, but is really well reflected in the structure of the season. He is literally the afterthought in the second episode and only appears for a moment, which gives the writers a perfect opportunity to give him a spotlight in episode 3 in a story completely separated from his siblings.
Whoa, what was that?
Episode 3 is called There's a Mattress in There and is truly such a fun, proper introduction to Yoshi. I definitely think many consider this to be the silliest episode of the season, with the reasons for that being pretty obvious, but I also think there is still so much to dig into in regards to Yoshi's characterization. The cold open really gets right into it, set in 2006, as some kind of psychologist talks to Naomi and Elliot about Yoshi. Yoshi would be about 15 years old in this scene, so basically smack dab in the middle of high school, and they're clearly searching for answers to Yoshi's struggles. The doctor lays out that he has ADD, dyslexia, executive function disorder, all of these things that just make life and presumably school more difficult for Yoshi.
Lack of spatial awareness, distractibility, poor inhibition.
Cool guy. Oh no!
Now, they get a bit satirical here as the psychologist basically explains this could be a result of something called pacifier shirt syndrome, something that stems from parents wiping a dropped pacifier on their shirt before giving it back to their baby, rather than cleaning it off or getting a new one. This results in Elliot admitting that he's done this many times when Yoshi was a baby, and Naomi becomes furious about it. This basically illustrates how Naomi is really just looking for someone or something to blame. Any explanation for why Yoshi is the way he is that goes beyond genetics, which becomes particularly funny when you look back at the cold open of the previous episode, in which we literally see Naomi wipe Yoshi's pacifier on her shirt before sticking it right back in his mouth. Side note, this was meant to be the episode after this one, which means this was going to be a very funny follow-up to this, but since they rearranged the episodes, it's actually just another one of those revelations you find on rewatch. This series really is just kind of infinitely rewatchable. But this obviously says a lot about Naomi and also a lot about Elliot, which bleeds into the way they treat Yoshi over the main story of the episode, the bulk of which takes place in 2013 when Yoshi is 22 years old, struggling to find his way into young adulthood. It shows that he's still struggling with those same issues laid out in the cold open. He's some kind of ham delivery guy in this hambulance, but he's late and then he gets distracted by a bird, causes a 5-truck sandwich-themed collision, and this leads to him having to move back in with his parents, much to Naomi's chagrin. Naomi and Elliot's opposing approaches to this are really interesting. They both want to help Yoshi, but Naomi is far more critical and demanding.
I think you love him too much to see reality. I love him the right amount, so I see his flaws.
Naomi is more controlling and wants to basically pick Yoshi up, put him on the exact track she believes is best, and push him forward, which is why she straight up gets him a job at her friend's sewing machine factory, despite Yoshi having zero interest in this. But Elliot seems to better understand that Yoshi is going to have to find his own path, find experience in his own strengths, which is why, even when Yoshi gets obviously swindled into what is effectively a pyramid scheme, he actually encourages Yoshi to pursue it. This season does an outstanding job spreading screen time among all of the family, but I think the member of the Schwartz-Cooper-Schwooper clan who ends up with a tiny bit less focus is Elliot Cooper. Where this is decidedly a Yoshi episode, I also think it's the episode with the most insight into Elliot overall. Despite the ill-advised endeavor that Yoshi is pursuing, Elliot sees that Yoshi feels motivated and passionate. He doesn't want to clip his wings because he knows that feeling is valuable for Yoshi, even if Elliot isn't confident in the business itself. And let's be honest, a lack of confidence is fair, given the product is a mattress in a tube. If I can delve into the BoJack connection for a moment, I've seen a lot of fans compare Yoshi to Todd, and I do think that superficially, yeah, they have some things in common. They're the goofier, younger misfit character, they struggle to find their paths in life, they are sort of perceived as slackers by their loved ones and friends, but I think when you really get to the meat and potatoes of those characters, they come from slightly different places. Todd is a character who really struggled to hone in on who he is. He had all of these big, ambitious ideas, and he often pursued those ideas, but typically he would fail on follow-through, or the execution was haphazard and didn't hold up to scrutiny. Even when he did genuinely succeed, he never really felt like he was comfortable or at peace with himself in those successes. More like he was just sort of stumbling into success accidentally. By the end of the series, he had not just found himself, but finding himself led to him finding his true calling. Yoshi, however, seems to be more of a confident and capable character to me.
I already have confidence.
Why?
I know there's something I'm great at. I just need to find it.
Though he also struggles to find exactly what he is good at, he is very sure of himself, and his failures often stem from distraction, like we see with his ambulance fail in the beginning of the episode. But Yoshi's success in this episode doesn't feel like he's just stumbled into that success comically. He may have stumbled into the circumstance comically, but once Yoshi finds his groove, he actually shows that he is an incredibly adept salesman. All that being said, the mattress in a tube idea still 100% feels like something that Todd and Mr. Peanut Butter would pursue at PB Livin', so I fully understand the comparisons. It definitely takes a certain kind of guy to get excited about a mattress in a tube, but I do think there are some pretty distinct differences between Todd and Yoshi. And again, seeing Yoshi actually succeed in finding his voice as a salesman is pretty satisfying here. He genuinely impresses both of his parents and completely sells out the 300 Tammet tubes he bought. And rather than quit while he's ahead, Elliot presses him to try to continue his sales streak. Truly, the entire episode, Elliot puts his full support behind Yoshi. Yoshi, and even gets him a meeting at MBU where he teaches so Yoshi can try to sell them a huge order of mattress tubes. I think this also gives some real insight into Yoshi's psychology as well. He reveals that he has already placed an order for 10,000 more mattresses.
If any part of me thought that I could fail, I would fail. This way, I can't leave that room without a sale.
Obviously, this says a lot about the character, that literally any sense of safety net or any available out of his circumstance would prevent him from finding the drive to actually make it happen. It makes me wonder if even just having his parents' house to move back into as a fallback was partially to blame for his previous ambulance failure, and I think it ties pretty decently into part of the resolution of the episode as well. But the MBU scene is definitely a highlight here. Yoshi shifting the Dean's complete disinterest into the biggest sale of his life. Through tactics you might have expected to blow up in his face, but he doesn't just sell the Tamets as a product, but as something meaningful for every student who enrolls, a mattress for their entire academic career that they can carry with them beyond their time at MBU.
It's just something that says, MBU, you're here to learn. We'll handle the rest.
Again, really satisfying to see, and I think an example of how Yoshi is sometimes thinking beyond immediate practicality, which really fits his character, and I think ultimately fits what we will see in his growth as a person through the entire season. It feels like it was slightly forecasted in that existential spiral during his bar mitzvah, that he's often ruminating on a slightly bigger picture and not just what is in front of him, which is also illustrated in how he responds to the revelation that these mattress tubes are not remotely safe. As Tamet tubes start prematurely exploding and orders are canceled and refunded, Yoshi still doesn't quite see the gravity of the predicament in front of him, where Elliot certainly does. The way both of their journeys resolve in this episode is, I think, very effective. As Yoshi panics and desperately tries to find a way to climb out of this hole without giving up his success, Elliot is forced to finally move outside of his comfort zone and be a strict parent. And it's hard to blame him. After being so supportive of Yoshi throughout the entire episode, Yoshi doesn't show any appreciation and immediately asks him for more money, even criticizing his father's actions and decisions through his life.
That's what you do, right? Like your dream of backpacking around the world?
Yosh, that's enough.
Yeah, but I'm not like you, Dad. I can't just make myself small.
Small?
This is obviously just particularly insulting, given that this entire episode Elliot has stood up for Yoshi, fending off Naomi to allow him to pursue this ill-advised business venture. It's the only reason he was able to go through with it in the first place, so the complete lack of acknowledgement or appreciation is brutal. But Elliot moving out of that comfort zone and putting his foot down turns out to be exactly what Yoshi needs.
All this had better be out of the house by the time we get back, or you're out of the house.
Completely eliminating those safety nets or outs that we talked about earlier. What I really love about this episode is that it's a great example of one of those early adulthood failures, the kind that might feel like the end of the world in the moment, like you've blown your shot, but ultimately was an enormous growing and learning experience. Obviously, this entire venture was an objective failure, but mostly because the product was faulty. There is also no question that Yoshi's skills were honed and that he grew and learned a ton in the process of failing. But obviously, in the moment, after losing so much money and destroying the house with those tubes, Yoshi doesn't see this part, and maybe he shouldn't because he did really mess up.
I destroyed everything. And the way I talk to you, I don't know what's wrong with me, Dad. I think I'm broken.
Maybe it's a good thing that this is an instance where Yoshi is looking in front of him instead of at the bigger picture. This last scene really hits for me because it puts Elliot back in that supportive, nurturing role, but in a much more difficult circumstance. One in which he has every reason to be furious at Yoshi, but knows that as much as it pains him to push through his anger, it's the best thing for his son. It almost reads as Elliot talking through his own feelings, relating it to when Bob Dylan went electric, something that angered and upset him, but could never keep him from being a Dylan fan.
I'm never gonna stop loving Bob Dylan.
In the scheme of things, this is not one of the most impactful episodes, but one that gives us the best look at Elliot as a character, and it fits really nicely into the growth we see across Yoshi's story. I just love how profoundly real these characters feel so quickly.
And?
It's garlicky. Like, so
garlicky.
I have a feeling that episode 4, She-Ra Can't Cook, is probably a favorite among fans of the show. It's definitely up there for me, and it opens with the moment where She-Ra meets her future wife Kendra in 2012, who she picks a fight with over the express checkout lane at the grocery store. A real meet cute. As I mentioned earlier, this was actually written as the second episode, so She-Ra's introduction to Kendra here was also supposed to be our introduction to Kendra. It's sort of a testament to the format that they were able to rotate some of these episodes and that it didn't really skip a beat. But the cold open not only shows this meet cute, but also establishes so much about Kendra and She-Ra as characters, while also setting up the dynamics that will be at play throughout this episode. Firstly, we learn that Kendra is cooking her entire Rosh Hashanah dinner for a party of guests herself, whereas She-Ra has been given a very simple task for her family's Rosh Hashanah.
For your information, I was delegated apples and honey because my mom doesn't trust me in the kitchen.
As we'll see, this entirely foreshadows She-Ra's conundrum for the episode, not just in terms of mom-related kitchen issues or kitchen-related mommy issues, but in how she sort of haphazardly plans and executes without much forethought. Very different than Kendra, who even just in this cold open, we clearly see is an ambitious go-getter at heart. Not only is she prepping her entire dinner, but she straight up ignores the express lane requirements simply because she knows she has to get out of here and get to work. I also really like this last little interaction between them, but I'll explain exactly why at the end of the episode. The rest of the episode jumps to 2021, after She-Ra and Kendra are not only married, but have two twin boys, Benjamin and Walter, and are prepping to try and get their kids into a nice private school that has strict admission policies and limited spots. In order to try and impress the school and secure those spots, She-Ra signs up to make an entree for their potluck. And if you paid attention to the cold open, you'll know She-Ra isn't particularly adept in the kitchen. But the setup for the story goes a lot deeper and definitely feels like it was set up to slightly shock the audience with its non-linear timeline, especially when you consider that this was meant to be the second episode. While figuring out what to cook, She-Ra calls Avi, and the conversation begins with this surprisingly nonchalant reveal.
Hey, who died?
Still mom.
Even at episode 4, this is a pretty strong way to showcase the realities of the series format to the audience. Obviously, we haven't seen the last of Naomi, but to already experience some of the aftermath of her passing and the ways grief hits her kids, I think it definitely changes how you see sequences with Naomi later in the series, and by later, I of course mean earlier in the timeline. I think this episode does an outstanding job showcasing how trauma and these more difficult family dynamics can echo even beyond death. Because even though Naomi is obviously not in this episode, you can feel her presence in a lot of ways, starting with Avi and She-Ra simply acting out some of the ways she would have reacted to similar circumstances.
I should make something easy, only the best for my children.
For you, I suffer.
Yeah.
Initially, She-Ra and Avi sort of write off Naomi's way of doing things, and the fact that she would likely criticize She-Ra for doing something easier. But I love the way that even in death, Naomi sort of worms her way into She-Ra's head through those insecurities. I think this happens twofold. For one, by She-Ra not being able to shake the idea that Naomi would look down on her for taking the easy route in the kitchen, and two, because she gets triggered when Avi says that Naomi and Jen used to bond over cooking.
Mom and Jen bonded?
Now, the episode also established that Kendra is incredibly busy and She-Ra has to take the lead on the cooking, so these kitchen decisions are pretty firmly driven by those insecurities and traumas from her relationship with her mother, and not at all by logic. Because the parallel story here is that alongside She-Ra going through this brand of grief, Kendra has to adjust and cope with She-Ra's decision making while she's going through that grief, and she has a hard time dealing with some of it. Like when She-Ra decides to drive to Jen's to get her blender back instead of just borrowing a neighbor's, which, to put in context, a drive from Oakland to Santa Rosa is at least an hour each way, leaving Kendra with her swamped work schedule and two young kids.
Go get your blender. But while you're at Jen's, you might want to also get her divorce lawyer.
Ultimately, I think this episode is just such a nuanced look at the complex emotions that come with grief. By all accounts, She-Ra did not have a great relationship with her mother, and even from just a couple of episodes, we know that Naomi was difficult, to say the least. You can tell that She-Ra holds all kinds of resentment and pent-up frustration towards her, and yet also longs for the connection she'll never have. This episode reads as She-Ra's attempt to reconcile those feelings of spite and longing, to find some kind of connection with Naomi even beyond the grave. In many ways, it's pretty heartbreaking, but it's also sort of heartwarming. There's this moment when She-Ra initially finishes the knishes. Kendra loves them, but to She-Ra, they just don't taste like her mom's, and so she trashes them. It explicitly showcases that this was never about making the better or more difficult meal for the potluck. It was always about Shira and Naomi. I really love the way this episode intertwines its emotionally climactic moments. Kendra is at the end of her rope and looks to Elliot for advice as Shira digs through her mom's knish recipe to see what she's doing wrong. And simultaneously, we get this beautiful resolution and understanding for Kendra as she stresses about Shira, and Shira gets this beautiful resolution in seeking that connection to her mother. Elliot tells Kendra that the lengths Naomi would go for her kids never really got easier for her, but that wasn't really the point.
You do something hard, so they know that you love them.
And as Elliot says this, Shira finds the note on the recipe to add 8 cloves of garlic instead of 4 because Shira likes it garlicky. I don't think I've ever cried reading a recipe before this. That realization that the reason Shira was feeling like a failure in her attempt to connect to her mom through cooking was actually because of something Naomi would do specifically for Shira. And while this is obviously a real emotional highlight, I think the connection to the Kendra story goes overlooked. Obviously, Kendra has gotten the short end of the stick this entire episode, but she also realizes that Shira is going through something uniquely difficult and emotional, almost processing the grief of losing her mother well after the fact. And though Kendra is doing far more than she should have to do, Elliot's words help her see that it's exactly what Shira needs from her to help her get through this difficult process. I love that this episode is showcasing a circumstance that doesn't have any easy answers. A purely logical approach would have neglected Shira's emotional healing, and sometimes the best answers actually do have the hardest paths. This is where I want to quickly jump back to the end of that cold open. I think the final part of Shira and Kendra's meet cute was a pretty great little microcosm of their dynamic, and one that illustrates the shift we saw here, obviously coming after years of their relationship. After Shira panics that she got the wrong honey, she bails and sort of embarrassingly asks Kendra if she'll save her spot in line, to which Kendra just straight up says no. And I don't think anyone would blame her there, but I think Kendra's attitude towards Shira in their first interaction here is really interesting when you look at her attitude towards Shira in her final action of the episode. After Shira finishes the knishes and has that major emotional breakthrough, she passes out only for their dog, the undeniable Isadora Duncan, to completely ruin the knishes. And despite having taken on nearly everything across the episode, rather than wake Shira, Kendra cleans the kitchen and remakes the knishes herself, obviously tying into that message Elliot conveyed that doing the hard thing shows how much she loves her. But also, the juxtaposition with that first scene shows how much a relationship can grow from first interaction to most recent. Kendra sort of spitefully refused to save Shira's spot, even though it frankly would have been a very easy thing for her to do. Obviously, she didn't know this person and they had just publicly argued, but I think it's still pretty cool to see Kendra just flat out say no to something so simple at the beginning of the episode, and then to go so far out of her way to preserve that emotional catharsis that Shira had achieved, and to not even tell her about it, doing it purely out of love for her wife, to her own detriment. And I'm sure Shira then deciding that they're completely bailing on the school the next day must have made her feel a little bit insane.
Wait, it's inside? Are they trying to give us all COVID? No way, forget it.
But like so many moments in this series, this seemingly rash decision also earns some major context through later reveals, which we'll obviously talk about soon. The other part of this episode that I love is that even though this is a major Shira and Kendra episode, we get a ton of great insights into Avi's family and their life post-divorce, also giving us the first explicit confirmation that Avi and Jen got divorced, which was implied in the tag of the very first episode. We get our first look at teenage Hannah and see that she has a pretty good and healthy seeming relationship with Avi, though Avi does seem to be struggling to keep up with the details of Hannah's friendships, hinting that she may be struggling socially. And we also see how differently Hannah interacts with Avi and Shira versus her own mother. She pretty excitedly shares a lot about her life with both her dad and aunt, and completely rejects any of Jen's attempts to connect.
Hannah, did you pass that resolution?
Mom, I have to study.
I mostly just appreciate that the show manages to give us these important little insights into these characters, even in episodes that aren't specifically focused on them, and they do it pretty seamlessly and naturally within the story at hand. None of these feel like tangents or side quests, just well-structured catch-up at various time periods within the story of the episode. It feels like this show actually has a much more delicate tightrope walk because it's told non-chronologically, and they just don't really waste any real estate.
Okay.
Okay.
The 5th episode, Yoshi and Baby, might actually be my favorite of the series, and is definitely one of the most pivotal for the Schwooper siblings. This is basically the direct follow-up to Hannah's dance recital, with She-Ra and Kendra asking Avi and then Yoshi for a sperm donation, but the cold open is set in 1998 and shows off a little bit of Yoshi and She-Ra's dynamic, as well as our first real introduction to Baby, who we saw She-Ra sort of crash out over in the first episode. She-Ra and Baby are playing horse, and Yoshi wants to try, to which She-Ra pretty instantly shuts him down. Baby convinces She-Ra to give him a shot, only for him to smack She-Ra right in the face with the basketball. It's a silly little sequence, but it also pretty directly parallels the events of the episode, the rest of which takes place in 2015. It's the night before Yoshi has to go through with his sperm donation, with Kendra being on a very specific IVF schedule and routine, so She-Ra is really counting on her younger brother here, and Yoshi is determined to do right by his sister. He's really honored that She-Ra asked him in the first place, and he's doing everything right in terms of his preparation. He's dedicated, but his night takes a turn as his friend Danny fails to meet him at a potato ice cream food truck where Yoshi coincidentally runs into Baby. I think what I love most about this episode is that it's a pretty complicated dilemma for Yoshi. This is a character who is going through his 20s really struggling to find himself, and the night that is laid out before him basically presents him with two opportunities. One, to do right by his sister, and another, to do right by his own growth as a person. I think this cold open is partially meant to illustrate that Yoshi really feels the inferiority complex being the younger brother, and that She-Ra didn't do much to alleviate that. When she asks him to be the donor, he even says that he's always felt like the extra sibling, and so it seems like his dedication to this whole endeavor is really a means to prove himself to his older sister. But Baby entering the picture here is sort of a perfect wrench throw, because Baby, being She-Ra's teenage best friend and not having seen Yoshi in over a decade, is able to help sort of reflect Yoshi back onto himself in a way he wouldn't have been able to see before. Because when Yoshi starts to talk to Baby and tell her what he's been up to, and she gets a sense of who he has become in the interim time period, she likes what she sees. And suddenly, being perceived differently allows Yoshi to see himself a bit more accurately, and not just rooted in the family and sibling dynamics that are so tied to his own sense of identity. While Yoshi may be feeling like he's still just that extra sibling without much to offer, it makes someone seeing how far he's come to affirm that he actually does have a lot to offer. And with Yoshi going back to Vermont and Baby leaving town for a new job in Shanghai the next day, Yoshi has to choose between following this one night only confidence building adventure or calling it a night to make sure he does right by She-Ra. And I love that you can see Yoshi's confidence grow through his interactions with Baby. At first, when she expresses that she wants to keep talking, he's very apologetic and minimizes himself.
Please don't feel like you have to. I mean, you can totally go ahead with your friends if you want to.
This is me doing what I want.
But by the time they get to the bar to meet Baby's friends, he's enamoring everybody with the tales of his farm adventures. He is genuinely impressive to them. I think it's also really important to point out that even though Yoshi chose to continue his night, he is making all of his decisions with his She-Ra obligations in mind. He still chooses not to drink, opting for a glass of olives instead, and he's going to head home at a super reasonable hour until the night takes a turn when he and Baby realize that they left all of their things in Yoshi's backpack at the food trucks. I also really want to talk about the dynamic between Yoshi and Baby here, because that's another highlight for me. I think outside of Yoshi's growth, this episode is enjoyable because these two are genuinely cute together, but it's also very much a sort of opposites attract scenario. Throughout the episode, Baby is very blunt and makes a lot of pretty unnecessary and rude comments. Even the entire setup here is sort of Baby being selfish. All of her friends have come out to meet her as her last hurrah before she leaves town, and she temporarily just abandons them to chat with Yoshi. But at the same time, she is clearly very attracted to Yoshi's more selfless nature. The scene on the bus is a great example, smiling admiringly when Yoshi gives up his seat and then feeling annoyed when he ushers her to do the same for a pregnant woman. The most interesting moment that showcases this is at the end of their time at the bar, and it's actually the one time that their oppositional natures seem to really conflict in a meaningful way. Yoshi is opening up about his inability to make deeper connections and that he feels like he still isn't all there yet himself, to which Baby seemingly projects one of her own dating experiences onto Yoshi, saying guys use figuring themselves out as an excuse.
I wasn't making an excuse.
No, I know. I was just talking about other...
Well, I was talking about me.
This exchange brings the entire night to a screeching halt, and if they hadn't needed to go find Yoshi's bag together, it would have been the end of their evening. But this is such an interesting moment to dig into, because it's one of the few moments in this episode where Yoshi really pushes back and stands up for himself, in opposition to what Baby is saying or doing, and Baby is ready to entirely end the evening over favorite, and I think this is a really interesting look into Baby as a character and hints at some of the things we'll learn later about her and Shira. But I think one of the other things that makes this such an interesting dynamic is that without Baby's more selfish approach, they likely would have never tracked down their stuff. She basically threatens the last remaining food truck into giving them more information, and then when they narrow down what neighborhood the Potato Man lives in, she insists they steal these bikes so they can search faster. And not only do these things actually all work, but they lead to these really cute moments that the pair share together. The stylized background blur when they're riding in this sequence is one of my favorite visuals in the whole series. Honestly, I really appreciate the way that the whole Yoshi/Baby dynamic makes the emotional side of my brain sort of root for it, and the logical side of my brain say, this is not a good idea, because as little sense as it makes, they are really cute together. I mean, Yoshi's face when Baby calls her phone from his to make sure he has her number, so perfect. And it makes the big emotional climax, for lack of a better term, hit so effectively for me. As Yoshi sort of defeatedly walks away from Baby's apartment, knowing his obligations as a brother are trumping his own potential moment of growth and self-confidence, he decides to make a decision here for himself. I love this needle drop. The song Little of Your Love by Haim, it's so perfect because the lyrics can be read two ways. They can be seen from Shira's perspective or as Yoshi's inner monologue. As he walks away, they sing, "You're so close now, so don't let me down." Yoshi is so close to the end of his night. He could go home and not let down his sister. But from Yoshi's POV, he was so close to this big breakthrough moment in his own growth. And by walking away, he would be letting himself down. I love Yoshi walking back to kiss Baby as the song blares. It just hits a uniquely emotional pitch for me. And even though we can definitely presume Yoshi didn't intend on going any further with Baby than this kiss due to his donation obligations, we hit that climax anyways. Honestly, such a shocking and funny end to the night with truly horrific and dire consequences. I also love that Avi jumps up immediately to try and help Yoshi after this, and also just how many tiny pieces of these sibling dynamics are at play here. Avi suggests he can donate instead of Yoshi, which is obviously what Shira wanted first, something that Yoshi does not know, but also something I think we can tell Avi has some regret and shame over in terms of how he handled the request. When they actually go to talk to Shira about it, Avi lets slip that Shira asked him first, and I think Yoshi's reaction is really interesting.
Which you wanted in the first place.
First place?
Avi.
Is that true?
Wait.
Obviously, he's hurt. The fact that Shira seemed to have asked him first meant so much to him in the moment, but he's also in a place where he has to appeal to Shira because he messed up, so he doesn't even get the opportunity to be properly upset about this and process it himself. And to add even more nuance to the complexities of these sibling dynamics, he also has to reveal to Shira that the girl he was with that night was Baby. I think another really impressive aspect of this show is the way it's able to slow burn some of these stories/mysteries while still making their inclusion impactful before we know the full scope of those stories. The Shira and Baby fallout plays a huge role in 3 episodes of the season, but we don't see exactly what happened until episode 9. And I think what makes that particularly effective is that in this episode, we know about as much as Yoshi does. He even asks Baby about their falling out, and she's very cagey and doesn't really get into any detail. And even in those moments, it's nice to see Yoshi defending his sister.
You know, Shira can go just like nuclear for no reason.
I mean, yeah, she can definitely fly off the handle, but usually it's not no reason.
I think the real balancing act here is that it allows for Shira's feelings of betrayal to feel justified without making Yoshi feel like a true bad guy. Obviously, we'll get into the details later in the video, but if Yoshi had known the extent of Shira and Baby's falling out, you know he would have done things differently. There's not really any bad guy in this whole scenario. It's just a lot of complicated dynamics at play because life is weird and difficult.
The best gift I can give my unborn children is they're gonna have 0 of this in them.
Overall, this is just such an outstanding episode for Yoshi's growth, and one that illustrates the complexities of sibling relationships so well. It's my personal favorite episode.
I don't know anything about wolves. You know, I might have been projecting some things.
Okay, episode 6. Honestly, on my first and second watch, this was probably my least favorite episode, and maybe it still is, but it's really grown on me each time. My latest rewatch, I really appreciated its ideas and the way it explores Avi and Hannah's similarities and differences. The cold open of this one is set in 1997 as Avi tries and fails to teach his family how to play a board game, Shepherds of the Fertile Crescent, clearly a Settlers of Catan ripoff. This is one of those really beautifully written scenarios scenarios that allows the show to showcase everybody's personality perfectly, but there are pointedly important back-to-back lines here.
This is why you don't play games with your family. Your family are not your friends.
This is what really sets the stage for the Wolves saga, which is set in 2021. Because as you might expect, Avi both not having very many friends and his resentment towards his family for not having any patience for his interests entirely informed how he parents his daughter, Hannah. We've already seen little hints of their close connection in the 4th episode, Shira Can't Cook, and seen firsthand that while Hannah is close with Avi, she has zero patience for Jen. And I think the root of this is that while Avi is certainly a good father in many ways, he treats Hannah as more of a friend, where Jen is left to be more of the traditional parent. This is also just a dynamic that often stems from divorced households. I even see a bit of this in my teenage relationship to my divorced parents, but it also means that Avi's maybe got a bit of work to do on himself to help him be a better parent. You can see in the opening scene how Avi's own hangups from the way he was raised are preventing him from actually hearing what Hannah is trying to tell him, while showing him her double exposed photography and talking about what it would be like if she had a bat mitzvah. Hannah is basically trying to slip in the information that she doesn't really have any friends. Like father, like daughter. But because of Avi's resentment towards his Jewish upbringing, he hears bat mitzvah and fixates on that aspect, largely focusing on how it affects him. And there's a real irony here, because in his attempts to prevent the same kind of anxieties and insecurities that he had as a child through his upbringing, which led to his struggle to make friends, he is actually leading her down a path in which she also is not able to make friends. While we see that Jen struggles to get Hannah to connect with her, she has no issue actually hearing what Hannah was talking about here. She understands that Hannah is basically saying she doesn't have friends, and this line from Jen pretty specifically spells out what Avi needs to come to terms with in this episode.
Hannah needs friends, her own age, and you need to be her father.
There's this sequence where Avi and Hannah are playing Shepherds of the Fertile Crescent, which is obviously a showcase of Avi trying to be the opposite of his own parents. But Hannah basically says that she has no hope of making friends until college, and that she's just going to white knuckle it until she graduates high school, which is clearly not the attitude Avi wanted to instill in his child. But the other thing that Avi completely fails to hear Hannah mention over and over are the wolves. Truly, one of my favorite bits this entire episode is how nonchalantly everybody talks about the wolves, and how Avi is completely blindsided because why are people talking about wolves so nonchalantly? Now, personally, I read the reaction to the wolves as a parallel to school shootings. Obviously, schools have just evolved to prepare for attacks like that as though it's a normal part of going to school. And the nonchalant nature of everyone's reaction to the wolves is meant to parallel how normalized things like that have become. They don't even blink, it's just part of the curriculum. It's really clever when you just replace that super dangerous thing that's become normalized with a different super dangerous thing, and it makes it clear that it's very insane to just accept it as normal. But I love that the way Avi has to try to be a better parent to Hannah is to actually go out and sort of make friends, even though he makes the wrong friends. It's kind of funny to see a father going through a falling in with the wrong crowd arc. After going to voice his concerns about the wolves at a PTA meeting, Avi meets Caitlin McClendon, played by the outstanding Gillian Jacobs. Caitlin is basically one of those insane, naggy PTA moms who takes issue with everything. Honestly, one of my absolute favorite details in this episode is that this mom's group is basically portrayed like a cult, perfectly showcased by the incredible environmental details of Caitlin's house. Basically, all of this overly suburban Pottery Barn aesthetic is drawn to look like full-on cult imagery, creepy as hell, and it's so creative. Avi gets so fixated on these wolves that he basically goes against his better judgment and wants to use his suburban mom cult to pursue his agenda despite the obvious red flags. This is where we get the reveal that Naomi died of COVID, as Caitlin downplays the dangers of it, asking if anybody even knows anybody who died from COVID. This is where Avi reveals this is how Naomi died, and obviously this should have been his wake-up call to bail. But it's funny because though it is revealed here, it also lends context to so many things we've already seen. Avi was already the only one wearing a mask at the PTA meeting, as were Shira and her kids in episode 4 at the grocery store. In that same sequence, Hannah goes to the bus stop, puts on her mask, and stands far away from the other kids, something else that we can see is not helping her make friends. And of course, it really gives context to the end of episode 4, where Shira threw all of their hard work away in getting the boys into private school because the school wasn't taking COVID precautions seriously. In the context of that initial episode, it felt like she was overreacting, but knowing that this was what took Naomi's life, it makes a lot more sense that this was her deal breaker. Sorry for the tangential nature of some of these things. The show truly just does have all of these like great puzzle pieces, and it's so rewarding to fit them together on rewatch. But that whole whole falling in with the wrong crowd story becomes funnier when Avi gets arrested for live streaming an in-office protest of the school principal with the other cult moms, which then leads to the entire school going back to remote learning as a response to the wolf outcry. And I love that by Avi sort of failing to meet Hannah on her level and failing to reconcile with the needs she is expressing, he fixates on something that leads to an outcome that just further exacerbates the exact things Hannah was worrying about. Not only is Hannah now not able to socialize with kids in person at school, but she's a social pariah because Avi was responsible for the return to remote learning, and nobody likes that. I mean, it's about as bad as things could have gone. Though it is very cute that all of the kids of the cult moms actually connect over their collective embarrassment and shame here. I think this particularly works because A, it's a natural connection point, and B, even though Avi's poor decisions helped Hannah find friends in a roundabout way, it isn't played like this was a successful endeavor for Avi that led to good things. It's basically a good byproduct of a mistake. The real leap forward for Avi's growth comes after this, when he initially is going to stop Hannah from sneaking out to pursue her lure the wolves away plan, and actually ends up spending time talking to and connecting to her more personally. And in a full circle moment, the end of the wolf plan sees Hannah saying one thing, basically laying out the dynamics and interpersonal relationships of the school wolves, but really meaning another thing. She's clearly talking about herself and Avi.
You think he's being overprotective?
He's feeling displaced. He's afraid of not being needed, but Girl Wolf's gonna be fine.
And unlike the beginning of the episode, where Hannah was saying one thing but wanting Avi to hear something else, Avi hears what he actually needs to hear about his relationship with Hannah, whereas the former Avi might have continued to fixate on the wolves. The end of the episode mirrors the beginning in the car, but now Hannah actually has friends. She has to cancel board game night with her dad because she's got movie plans with them, and instead of waiting with him in the car for the bus, she gets out to go wait with their friends. It's an effective arc for Hannah, but also leaves Avi in a bit of limbo in a compelling way. To me, it shows that he's making progress as a dad, but is going to have to actually make an effort to make new connections and friendships himself. And I think, given what we know about Avi's life and where he is now, you can actually really clearly see how he got there. The sad truth is that this sort of codependent bond he made with Hannah likely really blossomed in the wake of his divorce, which makes sense if you backtrack and retrace the steps. Avi didn't really have friends in high school, as we learned, but then he went to college and he met Jen, and she became his closest friend basically from college through to their divorce. Then, post-divorce, Avi sort of transfers that closeness over to Hannah, to her detriment in some ways, and now Avi is basically back to where he was in high school, on his own with a family that has their own things going on, and I think that the hope is that he will find a way to connect to other people in a healthy way, ideally outside of romance and family. It's funny, initially I wasn't sure how much I'd have to say about this episode, but it really does have some of the most interesting and revealing dynamics to dig into, and it's kind of quintessential when painting the bigger picture of Avi as a character. It's a good, solid, funny episode. Episode 7 is called Kendra's Job, and this is probably the episode that feels the most separate from the remaining puzzle of the season, since it doesn't include any of the other main characters outside of Kendra. But despite this, it is genuinely a fantastic episode that gives really great insight and backstory into Kendra's characterization. The cold open is set in 1993 at Kendra's 10th or maybe 11th birthday party at a place called BJ Banana Fingers. This immediately shows a bit of a relationship with her father. He's portrayed as a stubborn workaholic who tries to give his daughter the best without actually understanding what it is that she wants. In this scene, he's bragging to a clearly unenthused Kendra about how they booked the fanciest princess room at the place. It also showcases that he's only really half paying attention as he's constantly on the phone for work, even at his daughter's birthday. But I love that this cold open portrays what is clearly a major defining event for Kendra, the realization that she doesn't need to fit into this societal box of what being a woman means. She doesn't have to like girly princess party vibes, and ironically, the party princess herself is the one who shows Kendra this is possible by sneaking her over to the skating room. It's cool to see such a pivotal moment in Kendra's life, one that clearly opened her up to new possibilities in who she could be as a person. But it's also fascinating through the rest of the episode to see how the BJ Banana Fingers of it all deeply imprinted on her. Now in 2007, we see that Kendra has become a floor manager at BJ Banana Fingers and is fully committed to that job. She seems genuine when she is hyping up the BJ experience, experience. Okay, actually, I think we gotta refer to this place as simply Banana Fingers. This is like when people tell me they like my BJ videos when they mean my BoJack videos. But Kendra is actually shown to also exhibit a lot of her father's hard-ass workaholic tendencies, both on the floor of Banana Fingers and in her personal life. We immediately see that Kendra doesn't even know what her girlfriend does for work, which is crazy because hostage negotiator is not exactly a common gig. And it's kind of a bummer to see that Kendra is basically going down that same path. She never felt seen by her father, and yet she isn't putting effort into seeing her own loved ones either.
You're my only priority. Hold on, I'm getting a call. I gotta take this. It's my boss.
But I really love the central dilemma in this episode. Kendra gets the opportunity to go through an upper management program for BJ Banana Fingers, and given that she's committed her whole career to them, she is ecstatic about this. But through her overt, blind commitment to the corporation behind BJ Banana Fingers, she completely loses sight of what made that experience so special to her as a child. And to be fair, this is also about corporate exploitation and the way companies prioritize optics over people. Kendra's opportunity to do the management program is postured as a feel-good decision and not a serious one, giving somebody from the Banana Fingers floor a shot at moving up even if they never actually stand a chance. And on top of this, Kendra is expected to run the Banana Fingers floor and do this program simultaneously, which leads to complete burnout. She has to work twice as hard as everyone else in the program just to get this opportunity, and she starts abusing caffeine pills in the process just to stay on top of everything. And Kendra being spread so thin leads her to start failing at actually giving kids the BJ Banana Fingers experience that led her to want this job in the first place. In the middle of the episode, Kendra's father has a heart attack, adding to her already overloaded regimen, and she has to take off work to make sure he's okay. And to me, this is the most important sequence in the episode, maybe outside of the very end, as a sort of mirror is held up to Kendra that she needed to reconcile with. She spends all of this time at the hospital trying to control a situation that is fully beyond her control, putting all of her energy into trying to help her father to the point where she has a full-on panic attack and is hospitalized herself. And when he wakes up, rather than show gratitude, Kendra's dad complains that she's even there in the first place. Not only does he lack any appreciation for his own daughter, he wears his burnout and heart attack record as a point of pride. And the things Kendra tries to tell him are ultimately things she probably should be telling herself.
Dad, you've got to slow down. You're gonna kill yourself.
So much of this show is about how parents' actions shape their children, and Kendra can't see that the disrespect her father is showing her here has already been reflected in how she treats others, as we'll come to see very clearly. The other fun aspect of this episode is that it shows how and why Kendra became familiar with Judaism, another thing she sort of owes to Banana Fingers. Since she can't even tell work that her dad had a heart attack as a valid excuse to take off time, she instead claims she's Jewish and was observing Rosh Hashanah, which she had only just learned about even existing when she was at the hospital. This is a great look at Kendra's all or nothing attitude as well, which obviously is painted as an issue in this episode, but when properly focused is a huge asset. Because she needs to also keep up the Jewish charade, she fully studies Judaism while running the Banana Fingers floor and doing the management program, even going as far as to use J-Date to find Jewish guys to go out with and grill about the specifics of Judaism. This whole episode is a great portrait of a character who has this impressive go-getter attitude, but lets it get in the way of not just her relationships, but her health and sense of self. And we see this all culminate in this symbolic killing of her own childhood as she succumbs to the pressures of succeeding in the corporate setting. She offers her boss a cost-cutting solution to find a reason to fire one specific mascot employee because they are close to retirement and will soon be owed a pension. And when she literally sabotages that person so that they have a justified reason to fire her, she realizes that this person was the princess who saved her from her own birthday all those years ago, the one who opened her eyes.
For the first time in my life, somebody saw me.
Suddenly, all of her employees hate her. She's overworked, spread thin, and in order to get ahead in her career, she had to maliciously fire the person who changed her life, while she was already sacrificing any real connection or relationships in order to pursue this career. She succeeds in securing her opportunity at BJ Banana Fingers, but basically gave up everything else in the process. Honestly, this last scene in the episode is nothing like I've ever seen on television before. Kendra goes to the Yom Kippur service that her obnoxious coworker invited her to. Obviously, this is Kendra's first Jewish service. As she arrives, the congregation is participating in something called vidui, a confessional prayer during which they beat their hearts with their fist. The woman next to her explains that it's meant to symbolize repentance for your sins. And obviously, as Kendra has seemingly betrayed everything she believed in over the course of this episode, this is an incredibly fitting time for her to experience this. And you can tell how affecting it is for her. But I think what I love most about this is not just that it is explicitly about repentance, but that it's through this slow, methodical, consistent beating action. This entire episode, Kendra has been moving 1,000,000 miles a minute and only increased in speed. And not only is this a beautiful representation of Kendra acknowledging the missteps she's made, but it's that this service has created a calming, meditative, consistent structure that she can tune herself to. Something that has finally slowed her down and helped her understand what is important. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire show, pretty easily. The series never feels like it's about Judaism, but they so brilliantly weave cultural aspects of Judaism into not just the stories, but the themes. And it also never feels like it's trying to preach what the right thing to believe is. It simply showcases how different forms of belief benefit some people on a character level. This is explored even more thoroughly in the episode after this, but we'll obviously get there soon. Maybe the most obvious and important thing here, finding Judaism is also ultimately what leads to Kendra finding Shira, as their argumentative, flirtatious meet-cute was over their Rosh Hashanah grocery carts. So obviously, while this story feels a little separated from the larger puzzle, it does deeply connect to why she's even a part of it. But the other thing that I find fascinating about this episode is that based on what we've seen from Kendra in episodes set after this, she's undergone a lot of growth. She is still a workaholic and she's the breadwinner in the family, but Shira Can't Cook pretty specifically shows the ways that even when it is very difficult and overwhelming, Kendra commits the time and effort into her relationship with her wife and kids in a way we probably could have never expected from 2007 Kendra. But also in that episode, we see that Kendra is now a major figure at BJ Banana Fingers in the corporate structure. And at this point, it's been 14 years since she got promoted from the floor. I think there's something to be said for the fact that though she was able to grow and change, and that she has had this important moment of repentance, she still benefits from the deeply immoral move she made that metaphorically murdered her childhood. I really wonder if we'll ever see her reconcile with that, or if she ever did in the 14 years between these episodes, because it feels like something that would weigh on her. Overall, I think Kendra's job is probably an episode that's going to be slightly overlooked since it has a little less intersection with the Schwooper family stories, but it's such an outstanding piece of storytelling and character building, and I think the more people watch and rewatch this show, the more this one will be appreciated.
Tell me about your shul.
All right, let's dig into episode 8, The Intervention. This is really the first time since the very first episode where we actually see the entire Schwooper family together. And that also hits in a much heavier way when you piece the bigger puzzle together, but I'll talk about that after we go over most of the episode. The cold open is the furthest back we've gone in any of these flashbacks to Naomi's childhood as she races home on her bike in 1959 New York City. This little vignette really gives a ton of insight into how Naomi learned to garner attention. When neither of her parents nor any of her siblings pay her any mind, she grabs her mother's brooch and stabs herself in the leg. And her cries get everyone to pay attention to her. She just manufactures an incident to bring everybody to her, and as usual, this parallels the main events of the episode pretty directly. Naomi and Elliot rent a house in LA and get the entire family to come down to hold an intervention for Yoshi, who she claims has a drug or drinking problem. This episode is basically just a non-stop barrage of various interpersonal character dynamics, and it showcases every single character really well, but it's all gravitating around Naomi for sure. Jen and Avi arrive. Naomi immediately shades Jen for bringing flowers without something to put them in, ironically the opposite of when Jen brought her the vase with no flowers in the first episode, which all feels particularly pointed when Naomi excitedly celebrates the flowers that Kendra brings, which admittedly did have a little bit more thought put into them, but Naomi literally buries Jen's flowers beneath Kendra's, showing clear favoritism to her Jewish daughter-in-law. And a lot of this episode's friction stems from the way Naomi treats people who don't live life the same way she does, or live life up to her standard. Kendra is really the only one who gets out unscathed here, in this way at least. Shira is immediately criticized for the clothes she's wearing and her hair. Naomi also immediately undermines both Avi and Jenna's parents by giving Hannah an iPhone against their wishes. This episode really is just this boiling point point for a lot of the stuff that's bubbled beneath the surface for years. Yoshi's existential fears and struggles to find himself, Shira not feeling like she can ever live up to her mother's expectations, Avi being completely incapable of pushing back on any of his mother's oversteps, something that deeply bothers Jen. When you really step back, it's about how Naomi's overbearing parenting style has alienated her children and driven them away not just in proximity, but from having actual open connection with them, and how Naomi, rather than approach these issues individually through self-examination, instead manufactures a crisis to bring everyone together. She stabs herself with a brooch, so to speak. The fun subversion of this episode is the intervention aspect, which obviously Yoshi doesn't actually have a drug problem, but he is so afraid of sharing the truth of what's going on with him with his mother that he actually would rather pretend to have a drug problem. He'd rather validate Naomi's manufactured crisis than tell Naomi the truth that he has become an Orthodox Jew. And yeah, it kind of seems like these fears were justified.
That's so much worse!
Personally, I really love this development for Yoshi. Every episode that's focused on him has really shown that he thrives when he has a bit more structure. Selling the mattress tubes, having specific duties on a farm. He was even fully on top of the sperm donation stuff for Shira, which was like a rigorous checklist. Of course, Baby threw a wrench in that, but before that, he was doing great. But all of these moments where he thrived were short-lived and temporary situations. Yoshi finds these stricter guidelines for life that really help him focus on a broader level through Orthodox Judaism.
I have felt lost for so long, and I don't feel lost anymore.
But this episode, of course, gravitates around Naomi, and her reaction is so emblematic of her biggest flaws as a parent. She doesn't see Yoshi's newfound peace as something to celebrate. She sees it as an indictment of herself, of her parenting style, of how she lives her life and wants her kids to live their lives.
I figured it out, and I gave it to my children because I love them, but they reject it because they want to reject me.
I haven't said this outright, but it's pretty clear that Naomi displays narcissistic tendencies. She is mostly worried about her kids in relation to herself, and this specific development is the perfect example of how that can warp her view and warp her relationship with her children. Where she should feel happy for Yoshi finding something that brings him peace and purpose, she sees it as an outright rejection of herself on a personal level. And as somebody who seems to be completely unwilling to give in when things don't go her way, this leads to probably the most messed up thing we've ever seen her do: force feeding Yoshi a meal that wasn't made in a kosher kitchen. She is so self-centered that she sees Yoshi's refusal to eat a cake she cooked as worse than her forcing him to go against his deeply held religious beliefs. She doesn't really even think twice about it. And this is a major breaking point for the family, where everyone tells Naomi how they actually feel.
All you see is clothes you don't like? You don't know how to just love us.
Naomi tries to justify the way she treats them. She tries to claim that when she bends her kids' actions to her will, it's because she loves them, that pressing them is good for them, which obviously, given her actions here, is completely unjustifiable. Avi is the real interesting case, because normally he placates his mother, and his inability to give her meaningful pushback has clearly bolstered her feelings of justification in the past. But we know that Avi has been bottling up his true feelings his entire life, and this is where they finally come pouring out. This shows how that kind of bottling can just make resentment grow and fester, because when Avi finally breaks, even his siblings think that he goes too far.
You had to trick us into having a dinner with you. Why? What does that say about you as a mother?
I also haven't talked a ton about Elliot in this one, and that's because as the general people pleaser and guy who wants to be on everyone's good side in the family, he went full avoidant in this episode, just completely ignoring the drama at hand and focusing on fixing the Airbnb's hot tub of all things. And while this could be read as being inattentive, I think it was definitely an intentional avoidance. He didn't want to be the bad guy, he didn't want to pick sides during a tumultuous evening, and so he fixed the hot tub. And in that Elliot way, he also kind of finds a way to fix certain things behind the scenes without any major conflict. And it's cute that he actually trades Hannah his nice camera for her iPhone, which we of course see her using over the entire entire wolves episode, which is set after this. The last little section of this episode is a pretty heartbreaking watch as the family is sort of broken and attempts to pick up the pieces. Avi's attempt to reconcile with Naomi really showcases exactly the problems the kids struggle with. Naomi's hypercritical, hyper-exacting standards towards them. If they don't do things exactly the way she wants them to, she not only doesn't understand it and is upset by it, but she doesn't attempt to try and understand it. Avi relays this to her by talking about Hannah's baby naming, and even all these years later, she immediately starts railing on the way that he and Jen went about that event, like it happened yesterday and she's still upset about it. Where Avi saw this as an attempt to build a bridge to his mother. Even though he is not religious, she wasn't willing or able to appreciate anything about it, and she is never willing to try to build a bridge back.
I want to have a better relationship with you, but something has to change.
While this moment is heartbreaking, Naomi's next move is a genuine step in the right direction, because she immediately, maybe for the first time we ever see in the show, attempts to build a bridge to Yoshi by asking about his shul. And in this brief little conversation, she not only listens to Yoshi, but also offers him some great motherly advice about how to not shrink his sweaters. A sweet ending to a bitter episode. And one of the most genius aspects of this episode is the title, because while on the surface it obviously appears to be about the planned intervention for Yoshi, ultimately, with the way it played out, what we saw was an intervention aimed at Naomi, intervening on the way she treats her kids. But this entire story really hits differently in the context of the timeline, and it's something I didn't really realize on first watch. This is set in 2019, and in all likelihood, this was probably the last time the entire family was together before Naomi died, and it might have been the last time any of the Schwooper siblings saw their mother in person, as she died early into lockdown in 2020. And this sobering fact makes so much of this episode even heavier. Even what seems like a fun callback hits a little differently when you realize that Jen brought Naomi an empty vase the first time they met and vaseless flowers the last time they ever saw each other, and neither were good enough for Naomi. So much of Naomi's behavior towards Avi in this episode stems from her wanting to be able to spend more time with him and Hannah, and while Avi has clear reason to be upset at Naomi's behavior, it's also clear that he was taking her for granted.
Avi, I'm old and
You're
lonely.
not old.
Seeing my
Avi offhandedly claiming Naomi wasn't old shows that her death was the furthest thing from his mind. She was in her late 60s, and it wasn't something he had even considered as a possibility anytime soon, and yet it seems like this might have been the last time he saw her in person. But I think the real tragedy is that this big explosive evening looked like it could have been a major turning point, a wake-up call for Naomi. After Avi makes it clear to Naomi that something needs to change if they're going to be in each other's lives, we see Naomi take a different approach. She actually shows interest in Yoshi's change in lifestyle, and this last beautiful little scene of them together hints that she can accept her kids for who they are and still be a good and helpful mother who feels needed. It showed that maybe things would be different moving forward, but in all likelihood, she never got the chance to really enact that change. It's heartbreaking stuff. At the very least, she and Yoshi do share this moment of connection. This episode might be the most important of the show. It's the major crossroads on the long story short timeline, the boiling point for years of resentment, and the last time the entire family would ever be all together. It is what should have been a huge turning point for the Schwoopers, and maybe would have been if there wasn't an even bigger, more tragic turning point around Fate's Corner.
Elliot, they're taking care of each other. It's wonderful.
Okay, so I know a lot of people just let the show autoplay, but if you were reading the titles as you went along, you probably held your breath a little when you read the title for episode 9, Honoring Naomi Schwartz. After slowly unraveling the story of how Naomi passed, the anticipation reading that title is for sure that this is the one that is about her death. But brilliantly, they subvert that expectation with a story set in 2002, where Naomi is being honored at a big event for the work she's done in her community. This kind of blew my mind, particularly given that BoJack previously used the whole heavy penultimate episode formula for its entire run, but I like that Raphael Bob-Waksberg and the writers swerved here, because this is another vitally important episode. Interestingly, it actually opens in 2014. It's the only cold open that's set after the bulk of the rest of the episode, and it's a little scene that once again showcases Naomi's perpetual criticisms of her kids, and the way she withholds any appraisal or words of affirmation, initially talking about how proud she would be if the Himes sisters were for her kids. Apropos of nothing, might I add, when Avi fishes for just simple appreciation and pride from Naomi for her actual children, she bluntly ends the conversation with this.
So if you know it, why should I say it?
And isn't that just so emblematic of Naomi? But the rest of the episode brings us back to 2002, and I think delivers two vitally important pieces to the season 1 puzzle. One, it finally gives us the full details on the Shira/baby blow up, and two, it gives us a completely new look at Naomi as a person through the way she relates to people outside of her family. And not only shifts our perspective a bit, but more importantly shifts Avi's perspective. It changes his entire perception of who his mother is, and while it's a showcase of a lot of the good she's done, that perception shift doesn't necessarily shift positively. This opening scene kind of establishes parts of both of these stories, starting with Shira and Baby in bed together, very coupley when Naomi walks in. For one, it's very funny that Naomi has zero suspicion about Shira and Baby, just obviously not something she even conceived was possible, but also the way Naomi adores Baby while actively criticizing Shira in the same conversation is a microcosm of what this entire episode is exploring. But this also starts to reveal the heart of the Shira/Baby drama. Obviously, if it wasn't clear to you by now, they are more than just friends at this point in their life, and Baby reveals that she actually wants to go to prom instead of to Naomi's party. This leads Shira to question what exactly their relationship even is. Baby brushes this off pretty immediately and even drops some not so encouraging hints that she does not take their relationship particularly seriously herself. And from what we know about Baby from episode 5, she isn't a particularly thoughtful person when it comes to others, which definitely comes into play heavily in this episode. Before Naomi's event, we get the siblings reuniting as they pick up Avi from the airport, and they all sort of lament and dread the evening ahead. Given what we've seen from their relationship with Naomi, particularly given the last episode we saw was the intervention, I think the siblings' confusion about Naomi being honored makes a lot of sense. And through this confusion and flippancy about why it's even happening, they land on doing a Mad Libs style toast for their mother because it's easier. But the bulk of this episode is set at Naomi's event, and it is funny to see how differently the kids see everything than everybody else.
I'd better not screw this up.
No, you better not.
Why are people laughing? This is like a hostage video.
I love the way that initially these stories are playing well to the audience and seem to represent things that people like about Naomi, but the kids see them all as elements of her incredibly difficult and trying personality. A story about Naomi getting a furniture store to replace a coffee table that Avi had stained is endearing to the audience, but feels like an unreasonable overreach to the kids. I did find it interesting that despite the fact that Shira was not enthused by the way her mother was being idealized here, it did inspire her to go and actually pursue Baby and let her know how she feels, which obviously we'll talk about how that goes later, but despite their difficult relationship with Naomi, her influence is kind of undeniable. Actually, you know what? Let's just do it now. We're gonna tangent into that Shira and Baby story before we get back to the Naomi of it all. And I think this episode really does a great job finally revealing just why Shira holds such deep resentment towards Baby. And while I think that Shira's pursuit of Baby at the prom was overly optimistic and misguided, it's incredibly honest because that is teenage love. And while I don't think there was ever a world where this goes the way Shira hoped, it basically turns into a humiliation ritual because Shira realizes that her entire perception of her relationship with Baby was wrong. And that's not fully her fault either. Baby was intentionally misleading. She withheld her true feelings about the matter because, as we've seen, Baby is a bit of an in-the-moment pleasure seeker, somebody who does what makes her feel good when she wants to and without much thought for those around her. So Shira seeing Baby kiss another guy, and then to learn that Baby regularly hooks up with this guy, and then to learn that she never even conceived of a world where she and Shira could be in a public relationship with each other moving forward, it's like 3 perception-shattering bombs going off at once. Or maybe like a perception-shattering plane hitting the first tower, since this is a 9/11 themed prom. But it completely changes Shira's perception of her closest relationship and what her future can even look like as a potentially out lesbian. But then the second plane hits and it changes everything.
This is done. No, it's not, because this was never anything.
The callousness with which Baby says this in front of everybody at prom, and the way she misrepresents the situation as simply Shira being unreasonable and making it all about herself, it's all so nasty. And obviously, this can be reflective of teenage romantic drama and the lack of communication that comes with it. Ultimately, the heartbreak, I think, was inevitable, but Baby's self-serving personality made it substantially worse, and Shira's long-held grudge feels entirely entirely justified. It's not just heartbreak. Shira lost her childhood best friend while her entire conception of her entire future and relationship was shattered. But Shira's prom adventure and Yoshi's combo of avoiding Uncle Barry and getting drunk with Danny mean that the only Swooper sibling left to see Naomi's event is Avi. And I think that's pretty key because his takeaways here clearly inform his relationship with his mother for the rest of her life in ways that they didn't quite affect Shira and Yoshi. As the speeches continue, Avi plays speech bingo with a bartender that he's kind of flirting with, and all of his expectations are continually upended. There are all these relationships and connections that Naomi has made with people that Avi didn't even know about. A rehabilitated white supremacist who credits Naomi with the change in his life. Naomi's sisters make a video telling her how proud they are of her for being so present in this community. And maybe most pointedly painful to Avi, this younger guy that Naomi supported as a social worker in high school. What hits so hard about this one is that there are all these parallels to Avi. He even kind of just looks like a slightly taller, more handsome version of Avi. A guy who is also into music, except he studies music at Juilliard. And he stands there basically describing all of the kinds of support that Avi never had.
Actually, I talked. She just listened.
Just listened? Mom?
I think the genius of this event isn't just this revelation that Naomi has done all of these kind and thoughtful things for people. And to be clear, this is a big and important part of the episode. It's sort of key to point out that the relationship some people have with their parents is completely different than the one their parents have with the rest of their community. And that while that sibling-parent relationship is wildly important and a huge part of life, it doesn't make up every part of them. It isn't all they are. But where I think some stories might have taken this kind of revelation and given a character like Avi a sort of new appreciation for their mother, this has the opposite effect, because previously Avi just thought this was all how his mother was. He didn't think she was capable of the things that these people are describing. And now he has this sobering realization that Naomi was this loving, supportive, thoughtful figure to everyone except for her kids. Previously, Avi basically just wished he had a mother who could see and support him. Now he feels like he has a mother who chose not to.
She sounds like an incredible mom.
She does sound like one.
Avi's fixation on this also ruins his chances with this bartender as well, and if that isn't just a microcosm of his issues, I don't know what is. Avi's mommy issues preventing him from having real friendships and slowly ruining his relationships. When the kids come up to finish their Mad Libs, it's clear that Avi has written the speech. Obviously, words like stegosaurus, farts, and surf replace some of the key pieces, but the message is clear. Avi expresses to his mother that he wishes he could have gotten the kind of support that Naomi gave to all of these other folks in the community. And sure, it's obfuscated a little bit by these Mad Lib words, but he's saying this directly to Naomi. He wishes she was there for him the way she's there for them. And there's this really confusing response about this from Naomi on the way home.
My favorite was the toast you gave. It was so clever and creative, and I love that you all did it together.
This is such a bitingly difficult outcome because it is, for certain, one of the only times we've seen Naomi actively compliment her children and be pleased with the way they did something. But it also makes it clear that she did not hear the content of that speech at all. It completely went over her head that this was Avi expressing that he wishes he felt more support from her. So you've got this major tornado of various emotions from Avi. He's happy he's getting praise from his mother, confused as to why this is what earned it, frustration over the fact that Naomi didn't hear what he was saying. In fact, Naomi is completely oblivious to all of her children in this episode. Shira was fully heartbroken and Naomi thought that her tears were actually for her. Yoshi, at like 11 years old, got wasted and she couldn't even tell. Particularly ironic considering the episode prior to this, we see that Naomi later insists Yoshi has a drinking problem when he doesn't. And of course, she failed to read between the lines and understand the true meaning behind Avi's speech, which hits even harder when you recognize that the main conflict in the episode Wolves was about Avi doing the same thing to his own daughter Hannah, not recognizing what she was actually trying to tell him in real time. This is another of those super important moments on the whole long story short puzzle timeline. It's the big Shira baby blow up, which obviously deeply affects Shira's entire mindset and heavily informs her insecurities moving forward. And it also intersects and interferes with key events and relationships like we see in Yoshi and Baby. And this episode also feels like a major shift in Avi's understanding of his mother in a way that probably started to really build that resentment that we saw boil over in the intervention. But I do think there are still these sweet little moments of family love and optimism baked within. The end of the episode sees Shira and Navi helping a drunken Yoshi as he pukes up all the Passover candy, and Naomi expresses through the door how great it is that they're supporting each other, building on her happiness that the trio did the Mad Lib speech together. And while it is frustrating to see Naomi miss some of the more important ways that she can and should be a better mother, she is right that these kids are at their strongest when they are there for one another. And I think this is an idea that we see echoed across the entire season. Those insecurities are seeded when they aren't there for each other, like when Avi left Shira in the water at the beach, and their confidence is boosted when they do feel like they care about one another, like when Shira asks Yoshi to be their donor. Honoring Naomi Schwartz is maybe the most illuminating when it comes to Naomi as a character, and it is an outstanding, subversive penultimate episode.
Shall Shabbat.
Amen. Amen.
Alright, we've reached the final episode of Season 1, simply titled Uncle Barry, with a cold open taking place in the year 2000 in New York. Avi and Naomi are visiting Barry before he moves to Vegas to potentially lay claim to any of the belongings he's going to get rid of, now that his wife Sylvia has passed. There are some pretty interesting interpersonal details to pick up on in this sequence, but the most important thing for this episode is that Naomi finds her mother's old brooch, the very one we previously saw her stab herself with to get attention. These really lovely memories of her mother wearing the brooch at various important moments in Naomi's life flash through her head, and then she asks Barry if she can have it.
Nah, I want to keep that.
This sets part of the stage for the episode here, which moves the furthest down the timeline we've seen so far to 2022, the same year that we saw at the end of the very first episode, and maybe fittingly, this takes place during Uncle Barry's funeral. This one largely surrounds the Schwoopers deciding if they go to Vegas for Barry's funeral, revealing that they actually haven't all been together since Naomi's unveiling. It's a pretty sad revelation that the combination of lockdown and Naomi's death has kind of splintered the family a bit, and they decided that it's actually worth it using this as an excuse to be together. But as you might expect, even after her death, everything sort of revolves around Naomi. Because of the timing and nature of Naomi's death, they never had a real funeral for her, and as becomes clear in this episode, they never really got to process her death or memorialize her properly. This episode really focuses on the unorthodox ways that Shira and Avi continue to process their grief after the fact. For Shira, she feels slighted by Barry's family, the Kleins, who didn't show up for Naomi's Zoom service, except for Joni, who Shira claims was eating corn on the cob mid-service. So, Shira spends the episode trying to perform a corn-based call-out retaliation, very normal behavior. Avi's is a bit easier to track. He learns Barry gifted his new wife Vivian the very same brooch that Naomi asked for 22 years prior, the one that belonged to Naomi's mother, and he is committed to stealing that brooch back for her. He loops in his dad and Hannah, which I sort of love, 3 generations of Schwoopers trying to heist a brooch for their dead matriarch. But what's clear here is that Shira and Avi's actions are misplaced, and they stem from unresolved emotions, unprocessed grief. But the reason we can see just how misplaced it is because rather than actually spending time together, the Schwooper siblings are all distracted by their grief. Yoshi as well, he accidentally gets swept up into an afternoon stroll down the Vegas Strip and quickly realizes that it's because he just wasn't ready to experience another death, not after Naomi's. He seems to be the only one who can verbalize the grief he's feeling, at least to an extent, and we see some of Naomi's traits flare up in Shira and Avi, who don't really notice or acknowledge exactly what it is that Yoshi's saying here, but you know who does notice is Hannah. And to me, this is one of the most important developments across the entire season. This show is very much about how we are shaped by our parents, about how generational traits can be passed down based on how we're treated. Sometimes they develop oppositional traits, other times the same traits develop through new means. We see that particularly with Avi. Despite how deeply he resented Naomi for some of these traits, he still ended up adopting some of the traits that he resented. This inability to read between the lines, to see what their loved ones were really saying to them, being one of those things. We saw it from Naomi in the last episode, and we saw it from Avi towards Hannah in the Wolves episode. But But here we have Avi's daughter, Hannah, breaking that cycle, actually recognizing that Yoshi is trying to say that he is hurting and then being there to support him. Yoshi's car ends up breaking down on his way back to LA, and with the sun setting, he gets a hotel room so that he can observe Shabbat. And though it takes a minute, and Avi in particular struggles to get there because of his religious hang-ups, the family realizes that instead of running in circles for these bizarre gestures in Naomi's name, they should be doing what she would actually want them to do, to be together, to be present with one another. What I love about this is that despite the family not being Orthodox, they all come together to gather a makeshift kiddush for Yoshi, and even go far out of their way to figure out how to loophole the candle lighting since the sun had already set, using Hannah, who isn't technically Jewish. And really, this is so representative of some of the most important messaging in this show, because time and time again we see that when the family lets their hang-ups and insecurities separate them and prevent them from being there for one another, things fall apart. But when they push through these things to embrace each other, that togetherness greatly outweighs any pain they're feeling. The candle lighting scene is so beautiful. As the family teaches Hannah the ritual, the Schwooper siblings all visualize these memories of Naomi doing it with them over the years. It's nice to see them having these calming, fond, positive memories of Naomi after the season showcased so much of the turmoil. We see Naomi at all of these different stages of her life standing around with the family. And maybe most meaningfully, despite his apathy towards the ritual, as it ends, Avi seems to have a sort of revelation, and he actually echoes their amen. The togetherness outweighs the pain. The entire family sits there telling old family stories, reminiscing about inside jokes. We learn the origin of the "is a Schnook not entitled" runner across the entire season, and I love that this showcases like the intricacies of these familyisms. Yoshi didn't even know the origin of the joke, he just thought it was a thing everyone had said forever, where Shira, Avi, and Elliot all remember that it was Uncle Barry who said this first. And as they sit there laughing about an Uncle Barry story, they're reminded that Naomi was deeply upset that everyone was laughing at this moment in time about the entitled Schnook joke. It was while they were sitting Shiva for her mother, and she was insistent that everybody should be as sad as she was. But it's just this somber moment as the family reflects on who Naomi was and how she might have wanted them to feel in this moment. They basically have this makeshift memorial 2 years after Naomi's death, not just thinking about who she was, but recognizing that their actions and what they do are the legacy she leaves behind.
I think we are the memorial.
We need happy reasons to be together.
I really like this message because, as is made abundantly clear this season, Naomi was far from perfect, but sitting in that reality and letting that resentment continue to fester beyond her death, it doesn't do anyone any good, particularly not this family. Though Naomi leaves a complicated legacy behind, improving how her legacy is perceived just means being a more loving, functional family. They are the memorial. This last scene is actually one of my favorites in the entire series for a lot of reasons, because it not only represents growth for the better in Avi, but specifically showcases how Hannah is continuing to break free of the cycles that came before her. Hannah actually brings up having a bat mitzvah, something we've previously seen Avi crash out about, but this time, despite clear discomfort, he actually talks her through it. And even as the Schwooper who desperately distanced himself from his Jewish heritage, he actually helps ease Hannah's insecurities that she wouldn't be Jewish enough to have one, or that she wouldn't be Jewish enough for Naomi.
There's nothing about you that wasn't enough for her.
But I love that this is also Hannah actively responding to what the family realized in the hotel after Barry's funeral. As Elliot said, they need happy reasons to be together. And Hannah pressing Avi for a bat mitzvah isn't just for her, it's a way to provide a happy reason for her family to be together. Not to mention, it's another pretty full circle action, given that the very first episode was about Yoshi's bar mitzvah. But it's actually the final line that hits me the most. Over the course of the series, we see that Naomi had this very specific phrase she'd use to tell her kids she loved them.
I love you, I love you, I love you, say it back.
In the first episode, we see Avi pretty willingly say it back to Naomi. Then, in episode 8, which takes place years later, he sort of slides right past it and even tells Hannah that she doesn't need to say it back. And this definitely feels like it's rooted in the years of resentment. Hearing I love you, I love you, I love you say it back, but not feeling that love meaningfully. And it seems like it fully shifted how Avi expressed love. We saw in the second episode, Hannah's recital, that he formed this tendency to say I love you without actually saying it with Shira.
Hey, listen, you know?
Yeah, I know.
You too.
And while these moments are sweet, they do represent this sort of repression, an inability to express how he feels verbally. And despite the fact that Avi is showing growth and willingness to fight these deep-seated habits of his, he still expresses his love for Hannah this way, though there is one key difference.
Hey, you know?
Yeah, I know. I love you too, Dad.
Just a beautiful representation of how this family is healing and breaking free of the insecurities and coping mechanisms that have been instilled and passed down. And honestly, despite his shortcomings, it's proof that Avi is doing a good job as a father. Whereas he eventually stopped saying I love you to his mother, even after she says say it back, his daughter offers it up freely without him even properly verbalizing it. Not to mention that this is set in the same location in the same year as that final scene of the first episode. The difference being that that scene was a sobering, downer revelation, and this one is hopeful and optimistic. It is such a simple but impactful way to end a truly unparalleled season of television.
You think Jews could have negotiated a better deal?
Now, originally my plan for this video, before it started nearing the 2-hour mark, was to loop back around and revisit the entire first episode to showcase how this show plays differently on rewatch once you see the bigger picture. But I realized that I can even showcase this with just a few beats from the cold open of the first episode. For one, there are just small realizations, like the fact that this cold open takes place immediately before the Schnook is entitled joke was born, before Naomi's big blow up the family reminisced about as they memorialized her in the last episode. But the line that blew my mind was when Naomi was venting about her frustrations with the rabbi's eulogy being written from a template and how she described it.
I'm sorry, but you go to a shul for 50 years, I think you're entitled to something more bespoke than a Mad Libs.
You're not wrong.
Obviously, the irony here being the Swooper siblings gave a literal Mad Lib speech to honor Naomi at her event 6 years after this. The further irony being that Naomi didn't even really comprehend anything within that speech, and it's one of the only things that we saw her actually express appreciation towards her children for. But one of my favorite details is just this one specific shot. It's repeated twice over the season, and I think it's sort of representative of the core character conflict in this entire series. When Avi makes Naomi laugh with his joke, we see her smile at him affectionately through the car's mirror, and how this positively impacts him. Later, when Naomi is praising the kids for that Mad Lib speech, we see the exact same shot. And isn't so much of this show about the ramifications of the Swooper siblings chasing their mother's affection and clinging on to any of those moments of appreciation that they get? After Naomi's event in particular, this was a moment where Naomi was demonstrably not seeing or understanding the things that Avi was trying to convey to her. And yet, when she praises the speech and smiles at Avi, he smiles back because that appreciation and validation is so scarce. He still feeds on the little he gets. I'm telling you, every rewatch of this show yields new rewards and new layers of understanding. And the cool thing about that magic trick is that after season 2 is released, we almost certainly are going to be able to go back to season 1 and get yet another new experience rewatching it with even more added context. Speaking of season 2, which should come out a few months after this video is released, let's do just a little speculation. I don't think this is something I'm willing to fully theorize about yet, but I do think that in season 2, we will probably learn more about Naomi's relationship to Barry and Sylvia. It just seems like they're hinting at a little more going on than is said outright. For one, Barry says in the cold open of this episode that he wanted Naomi to get first dibs before her sisters swoop in. Interesting favoritism with no clear reasoning. Later in the episode, they draw a little bit of attention to the fact that in a family story from Naomi's childhood, she was at Barry and Sylvia's house alone with Uncle Barry, which might not seem that strange, but we know that as a kid, Naomi lived in New York City, while based on establishing shots at the beginning of the final episode, and the fact that we know he lived in a big house, Barry and Sylvia likely lived upstate. So it wouldn't just be super easy or convenient for them to get to Barry's place. And of course, in the very first episode, Barry was furious that Sylvia wasn't given a candle at Yoshi's bar mitzvah, and he even exclaims that Sylvia was like a second mother to Naomi. It seems like we might learn more about Naomi's childhood in New York, and that maybe Sylvia and Barry took on more of a role raising her than we realize thus far. As to the nature of why that is, who's to say, but I'd expect that after season 1 showcased Naomi in a not so flattering light, that we are likely due for some more insight insight into her backstory and probably some stories that are a bit more sympathetic that dive into why Naomi is the way she is. Long story short, is such an outstanding and special show. I am sure that there are so many details that I missed because it's just so rich and dense, and there's so much to love and pick up on watch and rewatch. If there is anything I didn't talk about in this long video, leave a comment. Let's talk about it down there. And if you liked the breakdown, please make sure to check out the short interview I did with Raphael, Ben, and Abby for season 1. It's over on my other channel, Johnny Too Casual. And if you like the show, I want to encourage you to just watch it and rewatch it and tell everyone you know how special it is leading into season 2. Season 1 didn't get a ton of attention, so I'm not sure how likely a season 3 is, but if season 2 can make a splash on release, maybe we can help make that happen. And for season 2, I promise it will not take me 9 months to finish a video. After all, is a Schnook not entitled to a timely breakdown of one of the best shows on TV?
You laugh, but a Schnook is entitled.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.